In my last least used perks video, I featured perks like Machine Learning, Thwack, and Leverage. All of those perks got some changes, making them much better to use, especially in niche builds. So let's take a look at the 10 least used killer perks in the game once again, and see which ones took their place. Cruel Limits is the first perk from the Demogorgon that appears in these videos, now that its perks are not general and players have to buy the DLC again. I said in a past video that I really like the design of this perk, as the effects are really strong, completely blocking all pallets and vaults from being used after a generator is repaired. However, the effects can only happen 5 times during a match, which might make it situational for some players, and the other Demogorgon perks are much better overall, as Surge is straight up meta in some loadouts. This is a really complicated perk to balance, as making it stronger could potentially make this perk unbearable and very strong. Another problem is that there is a new perk from Kaneki called Non-R-Free, which does the same effect but only in the endgame, so it makes no sense to make this perk better than the new one. There are also many other perks that do its effect but better. Blood Warden blocks pallets during a chase, Crowd Control will permanently block vaults as long as the Hex is active, and Bamboozle will block the windows you want to block. For that reason, I get why this perk is unpopular, but it's not as bad as to make it one of the least picked in the game. Hex Two Can Play is what I consider to be the worst Hex perk in the entire game, even worse than Huntress Lullaby or Nothing But Misery, as even if those perks are niche, at least they can be great in some builds. Hex Two Can Play will activate after you get stunned or blinded twice by any means, and then it will blind the survivors anytime you are stunned or blinded. The effects of the perk are really cool and unique, however, it is the activation of this perk what completely kills it, as well as the duration of the blind effect for survivors. To get this perk active, you have to get stunned at least 3 times minimum in order to see the effects, so this already requires a lobby where survivors use flashlights, blast mine, or that don't pre-drop, which does not depend on you. And then, it's still a Hex perk, so survivors can break it, but you can reactivate it again with 2 stuns. The issue is that once survivors know you have this perk, they can just start pre-dropping first or stop blinding you, making this perk completely useless as a Hex. And the effect itself is not that good, as most pallets are placed in straight paths, so the 1.5 second blind timer is really short to have any effect on survivors. The only change I would make is buff the number to a considerable amount, like 3 seconds, so it fits as a Hex perk that can be deactivated and easily countered, or make it active from the start of the game so you can try and get value early in the match. After the rework of Predator, now becoming a genuinely good perk on certain killers, it was the turn of Bloodhound to replace the spot as the most trash tracking Wraith perk. Bloodhound will make the blood of survivors significantly brighter, making tracking easier for when you are chasing an injured survivor. However, this is already easier by default, as injured survivors make more noise than healthy survivors, so it's a perk that helps you in cases where this is not as necessary. Also, a recent update made scratch marks significantly easier to follow, so even the niche case of this perk being better on indoor maps is not that good anymore, as scratch marks already spawn close together. This perk might be good for newer players, but it's not something that a more dedicated player would choose. I am also sure that this perk has a significantly higher pick rate than it shows on Nightlight, as the stats here are only from players that manually input them on the website, and Bloodhound is a free perk from the Wraith, so true casuals run this more. The only problem this perk has, in my opinion, is the fact that you need to pair it with Sloppy Butcher in order to get the good effects of this perk, so making it give this effect as part of the perk would make it much better without having to stack it with Sloppy Butcher, making the latter focus more on the healing regression aspect of the perk, and making Bloodhound focus on the tracking aspect. The next perk is really surprising to see so low, and that is Languid Touch, a perk from Vecna that will make any survivors that scare crows exhausted for 10 seconds, and it has a 5-second cooldown only, so it effectively deletes exhaustion perks in the majority of matches, and the only problem it has is that crows can be inconsistent. This perk is really good, and I think the only issue it has is that it is a passive effect that you might not notice when you play killer, and only discover how impactful it was in retrospect. The biggest change I would make to all exhaustion perks is make it so that it is visible in some way for the killer player, just so that way you can see when a survivor is exhausted thanks to your perks, and that might make it more attractive for players to choose. This is the only perk from the video where I wouldn't change it in any way, and I think it is severely underrated for how easy it is to activate. I am not surprised at all to see Undone so low in this video, and I am sure the only reason it is not lower is because Unknown is a relatively new character, so some players might attempt to get the adept of it, as there is no reason to use this perk ever. Undone will grant you stacks anytime survivors miss a skill check, and the next time you kick a generator, you will consume those skill checks in order to regress the gen for the same amount, and block it. Wanna know something funny? This perk actually got a shadow nerf, as with the Orela update, skill checks will stop appearing as frequently once you let go of a generator, which was one of the easiest ways to get tokens before. So now, this perk is truly horrible and can only be used in low MMR lobbies where survivors still miss skill checks, making it the definition of a win more perk. This perk needs a complete rework in order to become better, as a perk that works based on survivor inputs is just absolute trash. An easy change would be to make this perk get tokens when survivors hit normal skill checks, kinda like Old Ruin, but I fear that it would make this perk way too easy to use with no input from the killer end, so my only other idea is to make this perk get tokens when breaking pallets and breakable walls, and that way you can get the effects of this perk without depending on the skill level of survivors. Shadowborn is indeed the worst perk of the Wraith, so I am not surprised to see it so low on pick rate, and the effect is really bad. You get a 10% haste bonus anytime you get blinded, so it's like a different version of Lightborn, where instead of ignoring the effect, you use it to your advantage. The problem of this perk is that the activation condition makes the haste effect basically useless. If you get blinded on pallets, you have to break the pallet, making you lose part of the haste. The other methods of blinding are from flashlight saves, which stun you for a long time, and by survivors using Champion of Light, which got buffed and it slows you down so much that the haste effect is useless. So the only way this perk is good is when a survivor blinds you with a flashbang during a chase, making this perk extremely situational even when you want to get the effects. 10% haste is not bad at all, as proven by Unbound, but as it is right now, this perk is way too situational and worse than the old FOV effect before the nerf. From now on, the same low pick rate perks from the past video will be appearing here, meaning that in almost one entire year, nothing has changed for them. Shattered Hope is one of those absolute trash tier perks, and if you saw my perk tier list video, you would know that I consider this perk to be the worst designed in the entire game, and the only salvation it would have is to make it have an entirely new effect, and keep the boon power as a secondary effect. Rapid response from Orela already shows this. The perk has a very bad activation effect that only exists in the case you bring the perk by itself, so at the very least, you have access to its effect in every single match. Shattered Hope is a free perk that fully depends on survivors bringing boons, which after the nerf are already extremely rare and locked behind paid and grindable survivors. It's such a bad perk that I am still surprised it exists as is in the game. Hopefully the devs make some changes to it, as this was the first free perk released in years, and with the current effect, it's basically as if this perk does not exist. Hoarder was the #1 least used perk in my past video, and now it is the 3rd least used perk. While this perk got no changes whatsoever, I think the reason it got its pick rate increased is thanks to Dracula's Human Greed perk, which reveals the aura of survivors near unopened chests, so both of those perks are a good combo. Still, I think the main reason as to why this perk sucks so much is because it is the worst perk from the twins, a character that is very unpopular, and their other two perks, Coup de Grace and Oppression, are much better and got buffed a lot, so players could get them in the shrine, leaving Hoarder alone. I think the only way to buff this perk would be with an indirect change to the chest mechanic itself, making it much more attractive to choose for killer builds. Chests are, most of the times, completely useless, and the survivor searching them now means that they are not repairing generators, so revealing their aura will only allow you to pressure a survivor that is currently not doing their objective. If chests contained parts of generators to be repaired, for example, then Hoarder would skyrocket in pick rate, and the only time this perk was used was back in the days when it worked with Nemesis and Pinhead, making it niche but really good. Septic Touch is another one of those perks that have been trash tier ever since they were released, and the funniest part is that all the other perks of the same quality, like Genetic Limits, Septic Touch got no changes whatsoever to it yet. This makes this perk officially one of the worst perks in the entire game, which is really funny considering how Shattered Hope was also released with the Dredge chapter. This perk might have gotten a shadow buff to it, as now that various killers have bigger turn radiuses like Hillbilly and the Ghoul, they can get the effects of this perk better. It's still trash, as it doesn't slow down the survivors, and instead it only grants them blindness and exhaustion, two effects which are completely passive and something that you as a killer player might not ever feel. I think that even if this perk got buffed to have 30 seconds of each effect, it would still not be used. Currently, only the healer gets the effects of this perk, so making it affect both the healer and the heal survivor would also make this perk interesting. For example, when you return to the hook in order to punish survivors healing under it. But even with that, this perk still suffers the effect of having the effects that are passive, which, just like Languid Touch, are simply not attractive for the majority of players. And finally, we are back once again to having Hangman Streak as the least used perk in the game, just like it was 2 years ago. The funniest part is that now with the Jagged Compass perk from Houndmaster, you can even get more Scourge hooks around the map, but the effect of the perk is still completely outclassed by Awakened Awareness or Barbecue and Chili, so there is basically no point in ever using it. This perk needs a completely different effect by this point, as it has been proven many times that the effect of it is completely useless, as I think that even if it made Scourge hooks completely unbreakable, it would still suck a lot. The effects of Jagged Compass would have been a fantastic buff to this perk, so now that the Houndmaster exists, it is harder to make this perk viable. The most nuclear option I can think of is making all the hooks in the map into Scourge hooks with this perk, and then the aura reading would be stronger. However, this runs the risk of making Jagged Compass not as attractive as it currently is. And those are all the least used perks currently in Dead by Daylight according to Nightlight. Are you using one of these perks? And if so, do you think they are underrated? Thank you for watching and have a nice day!